Moving on to the Middle East, where attacks against Christians in Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere have ripped apart communities that have historically coexisted peacefully.
Well, renewing that peace was the focus of a recent gathering here in Washington of patriarchs of Eastern Rite churches. Doug Bernard talked about that with VOA religion reporter Jerome Socolovsky.
Praying in English, Aramaic, Coptic, and Arabic, leaders of these historically quarreling churches made a show of brotherhood. It was the first time they came together to Washington. Their followers have been fleeing Islamic militants in Iraq and Syria after being told to convert or face death.
Jerome Socolovsky, you use this term, historically quarreling churches, in your report. Who exactly are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about all kinds of churches in the Middle East: Syrian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Syriac Catholic, Maronite. These are churches that have had theological differences in the past, territorial differences, over specific churches and holy sites. But now they're setting aside those differences and trying to draw attention to what's going on with Christians in general in the Middle East and other minorities. And
they're setting aside these differences because of what you say they feel is a grave threat to them.
It is clearly a grave threat to them. In a place like Iraq, 200,000 Christians have been forced to flee the country. I mean, that's a great proportion of the total population. In Egypt, many Copts have been leaving. Many Christians in many countries in the Middle East now feel it's increasingly unsafe to be a minority.
The violence, persecution, massacre, these are the different dimensions and manifestations of evil. Therefore, this is not only a Christian problem, this is a human problem.
The goal of this summit is to highlight the dire situation of Christians in the Middle East, and there is indeed a great deal of concern about it among Congress's overwhelmingly Christian members. Many came to show their support, but New Jersey Representative Chris Smith said he'd already held nearly 100 hearings on the matter.
It is not for lack of knowledge, it is for lack of commitment that Congress and the President have not stood up consistently, predictably, to speak out on behalf of the persecuted Christians in the Middle East.
Is it really enough to, as these faith leaders say they want people to speak out? Is speaking out really enough?
It's obviously not enough. They obviously come here not just wanting people to speak out, but also want concrete support from the U.S. and its allies. I spoke to one of the leaders who is very much in favor of U.S. airstrikes and wants the U.S. to not to send ground troops, but to cooperate with the Kurds and the Iraqi government just to degrade ISIS, this Islamic State extremist group. But obviously they believe they will feel a lot safer if there were more Muslims who were speaking out against this.
This is only a part of your report, but it just seems to me, as a casual observer, that there is more and growing religious intolerance in the Middle East. Am I right on this, or?
I mean, certainly among the groups that are grabbing headlines, they are grabbing headlines partly out of propagating a kind of Islam or a vision of the Middle East where Islam is dominant. If you're talking about Islamic State militants, there it's butchery. If you're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, they officially don't want Christians to leave Egypt, but they do believe that Christians should pay deference to an Islamic leadership. Either way, it's out of whack with what we in the West and what the international system expects with regards to religious freedom.
VOA's Jerome Socolovsky. Thanks to Jerome and to Doug.